I know there's some people here who came to my first speech at our 2020 rally. Our whole team has come a long way since then, but we've got just as far to go before the next election. I'd like to thank you again for being here with us on this journey to a better New Zealand. Our team represents New Zealand well. It's not just that we work hard, we reflect New Zealand. We are women and men, Māori and Pākehā, farmers and migrants, but we are all proud Kiwis first and foremost. And it is that I wanted to talk with you about today. Now I stand here as your Member of Parliament, who happens to be Māori. I'll say it again, as it bears repeating. I work for you, and I happen to be Māori, and a proud Māori at that, though if you ask Willie Jackson, he'd probably call me a useless one. This year, I've watched David and our whole team take on a topic that many New Zealanders feel deeply about, but stay silent. People fear being cancelled or called racist. But while there are those that seek to divide us into race-based warring camps, it falls to us to have some courage. It's time for us to have an honest conversation about the Kiwi identity. I would never claim to speak on behalf of all Māori, and I would never be so arrogant to assume that this was my place. Although that doesn't stop some in Parliament from doing so, does it? But what I can do is speak to what affects me and my family. Make no mistake, before I'm an MP, I'm a mum and a wife. 20 years ago, I married into a family who came to New Zealand as refugees, with nothing but the clothes on their backs, and in my in-laws' case, a little baby boy, my husband Ming. They came to this country to give their children a better tomorrow. They chose this country where everyone gets an equal chance, and they succeeded. We have 4 amazing children who proudly share Māori, Cambodian, and European ancestry. Yet today, the Labour Party would have us believe that there are just 2 types of New Zealanders: tangata whenua, who are here by right, and tangata reti, who are lucky to be here. Well, how are my children supposed to identify themselves with this logic? Half of them is here by right, and the other half should just be thankful to be here? If the Labour Party and the Māori Party had their way, my children would be labelled Māori by default, and their Cambodian European half of their heritage would become insignificant. My children are now growing up in a world that seems foreign to me in so many ways. The days where we all looked out for each other seem like a distant memory. People are now too scared to interfere in case they offend someone or find themselves cancelled or labelled. Personally, I can tell you this is a huge loss, because if it wasn't for strangers sticking their hands up and helping me in my younger years, I can guarantee you I would not be standing on this stage today. I would like to know that if my children or any child in this country needed someone to step up and say what's happening to them is not okay, that person would be held up as a hero, not a villain. Right now, people are too scared to help a fellow New Zealander, and this saddens me. I put my hand up for Parliament out of sheer frustration with what I was seeing happening in my community. It angers me to see our children, my children, being treated like a commodity, a political tool to meet an agenda that will have real consequences for us all. When my children are labelled as victims and yours are told they're oppressors, everybody's harmed and nobody wins. This thinking is simply misguided, It is distortive, divisive, and dangerous. And today, we see this division stoked everywhere, whether it be employer versus employee, landlord set against tenant, farmer versus townie, and most fundamentally, Māori versus Pākehā. It's no wonder we can't get anything done in this country. If we no longer see each other as allies, partners, brothers and sisters, working together for the greater good. Instead, we're told what matters most is not the content of your character, but the colour of your skin. I say, my friends, this is not who we are. Oranga tamariki is the perfect example of what goes wrong when who you are matters more than what you do. We now have an organisation that is more concerned about keeping whānau hapu and iwi happy than putting the welfare and safety of our children at the forefront of all their decision making. I understand better than most the deep-rooted issues that many Māori kids face. But putting race ahead of best interests is not the answer. We hear how Oranga tamariki is destroying families, and there may be some truth there. But baking race into a broken system can only make that worse, while masking the real issues that we really need to be tackling. All too often, we hear that Oranga tamariki are letting Māori down. Well, I say they're letting everyone down. Act says that every child born in New Zealand, every Kiwi, every legal immigrant has the same rights. Those are the rights of a citizen. Nobody should get extra say because of who their grandparents were, and nobody should have to be treated differently because of who they are. And as far as I'm concerned, my children have the same say as all people born in New Zealand, Cambodian refugees, and a myriad of other races who made New Zealand their home. Isn't that one of the many things that makes this country so special in the first place? The Māori Party's narrow-minded view that we only exist as Māori and Pākehā in New Zealand is damaging and disappointing. When they stand and claim to speak for all Māori, I can guarantee you it's not for Māori like me, who dare to have a different view to them. And how do some respond to this Māori lady when she expresses a contrary considered opinion? Do they address the arguments? No. They resort to personal attacks. You're a whakapapa Māori, but you're not kaupapa Māori. You're a plastic Māori. You're a born-again Māori. I've heard them all. I've even been called a traitor to my race, simply for trying to make a case for equality. I don't know about you, but if that's what your opponent has to reduce themselves to, it usually means you're on the right track, doesn't it? And though I hate to disappoint them, I'm not going anywhere. I will not shut up. My voice does matter. And my Māori voice really matters. And I refuse to be silenced and shamed, least of all by those who claim to speak for me. That's why ACT is campaigning for a referendum on co-governance. Let the people decide. It's simply the right thing to do. ACT proposes that the next government passes legislation defining the principles of the treaty, then ask the people to vote on it becoming law. The Treaty Principles Act would simply legislate that the treaty means what it says. The Queen is sovereign, your taonga or property is secure, and all of us have the same rights and duties. The legal fiction created in the 1980s that the treaty created a partnership between the Crown and a race is nonsense. The court found it created a relationship akin to a partnership, where people should treat each other respectfully. The establishment now wants to tell you that the treaty is literally a partnership. It's the tiriti-centric Aotearoa, the one that divides us into tangata whenua, land people, and tangata reti, treaty people. The one where my children would be labelled Māori by default, and their Cambodian European half of their heritage would become insignificant. It cannot stand, and I predict it will eventually be seen as a mistake of its time. The chiefs signed up to retain rangatiratanga while leaving kawanangatanga, or governance, to the Crown. People have tied themselves into knots trying to understand who's really in charge. Did the chiefs cede sovereignty or not? ACT's perspective cuts through this confusion. The chiefs wanted to self-determine, to practice tino rangatiratanga. They wanted to live their lives with minimal government interference, but have their rights protected by the Crown. Living how you want to live, with minimal government interference? Well, that sounds like something ACT could get behind. When you think about it, partnership schools, kura hawera, and charter schools were tino rangatiratanga in action. No wonder they were warmly embraced by the iwi Chairs Forum. What we're really fighting is what ACT always fights: collectivism. The idea that we're all part of a group, and the group we're part of matters more than what we do as a person. ACT can cut through this because we truly believe in self-determination for every single human. ACT is now the only party that's consistently stood up for the common humanity, what the old left called universal human rights, before they awoke to the madness of identity politics. It binds our caucus, it binds our country, more than any prejudice can divide us. It's time we flush the dangerous and divisive elements out and pass a Treaties Principle Act in Parliament and put it to the vote for everyone. Let's give the New Zealand people a say. Let's have this debate and let's win it. We have real urgent challenges to solve, and by ending the obsession with co-governance, we can get stuck into the real problems in this country. Creating ladders of educational opportunity for our kids, solving the housing crisis, helping people out of welfare, and getting tough on the criminals who make life a living hell for so many New Zealanders. We would use practical solutions that change real people's lives for the better. Charter schools were just the start of that, but something else far more important would happen as a consequence. People who feel alienated today would find a place in the Kiwi identity. Māori culture would be taken for what it is, a rich and essential and unique part of New Zealand's tapestry that is there to be embraced along with every other culture that makes up our country. I would like to finish off with the words of Dame Anne Salmond, someone ACT Party would not usually expect to agree with, but I'm sure she'd probably say the same about us. But in a time where we are calling for New Zealanders to put aside their differences, I thought it would be appropriate. So here it goes. The rights to equal representation and freedom from discrimination are fundamental constitutional principles in Aotearoa New Zealand. No New Zealander should be asked to accept that by virtue of their birth they are less worthy than any other. And the chances that if they are asked, they will agree are vanishingly small, because to do so is to surrender their dignity as a person. As it states in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 1, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. No ifs, no buts, no exceptions. The tiriti demands ngā tikanga riti tahi, exactly equal rights. For ngā tangata katoa o Nui Tirani, all the people of New Zealand. Thank you.